Well, we're here today with Robert Krueger, the instructor for IMC 648, Executive Communication and Leadership. Happy to be having this conversation with you, Robert. If you would, just for the benefit of setting the stage, if you could just take a few minutes to tell us about your professional experience.
A little bit of background about myself. I've been teaching probably since 2008, I think, off and on. So it's always been first of all, in regards to teaching, it's always been a valuable part of my life that I've always enjoyed and complement to what I do throughout the day. And so for the past 3 years, I have been the executive communications manager for Gensler, and Gensler is the world's largest architecture and design firm. We have 50 offices across the globe, and we've been around since 1965. One of the unique things about Gensler is we have a co-CEO model. We've had that since 2005, and so some people don't know that about our company, and especially like large companies like ours. And so, and it was created intentionally. It was intentionally created based off this collaborative leadership model. And so, in my unique role, I work with both co-CEOs on their messaging. So that involves a lot of speech writing, writing their internal communications, working with our PR agency on their talking points and their media interviews. Basically, anything that involves their brand and image, I'm involved with. Before I came to Gensler, I did that with a little bit with my previous employer as well. And so it's something I really enjoyed. It's definitely different than, say, doing communications or marketing for the larger brand. Like, for example, with Gensler, obviously we have team members who work on the Gensler's PR, Gensler's communications, Gensler's marketing for that brand. And so it's a little bit different when you're working for, quote unquote, the face of that brand. But it's something I love doing, and I've been doing it for like several years, and I'm not exactly sure if one is better than the other, but definitely has its challenges and pluses. But yeah, I love it in the end.
So what do you love most about it, or what makes you passionate? Like, what drives you to do that role, or to work with executives on communications and leadership?
Yeah, so I think that when it comes down to when you're working for executives, CEOs, anyone in the C-suite, I think it's a little more clear cut, what, in regards to communications. And what I mean by that is, um, it, I mean, really the buck stops with them. And so,
Right.
sometimes it's a little bit easier to get your ideas and strategies approved or to get them across, because when I used to work for, do communications and marketing for the larger brand, there was a process, for getting things approved. And so, I think that's one. It's a little bit easier to just sort of to craft that vision and kind of get that approved, and you don't have to go through that whole bureaucracy as you do before. But like, I think that in regards to your question about passion, I think that I just it's very similar to if you were doing comms or running a campaign for a politician. It's for the individual brand. It's different. Um, it's much different when you're managing a personality, and you're. But at the same time, I would argue it's a lot more effective, when you do hit your goals, because whether it's social media, or say you're working on a book for the CEO, or it's in the media, like the press or interview, and they want to talk to an individual, and they know exactly who they want to talk to. They want to go straight to the top of a company. And also, like, during, if there is a crisis, for example, right now we have, COVID. Last year, COVID, it struck, and its impact hit every organization and company. And so the CEOs and heads of all companies, all organizations, both big and small, were being, they were the focus. They were the ones that the press were going to be asking, how are you managing this? How are you getting through this? How is your team managing this? What changes will this bring about? And so, if you can win the day with your co-CEOs and C-suite, in regards to their comms and how they interact with their quote unquote their publics, like, you definitely have a greater impact on the positioning of your company.
I mean, I think it's fascinating, and ultimately, the question about I mean, the co-CEO model is something that I'm sure presents some unique even challenges in terms of synergy of messaging and ensuring that that they're together on theirs. But in terms of like when you enter a role like this, how do you build that level of trust with the executives so that they're willing to follow your lead, or at least maybe listen to what considerations you want to have them make in any conversation? How do you build that trust?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I mean, there's really like no simple way to it. It's just obviously the more time you work with them, the more trust you're gonna build with them, and the more involved you are with different projects that they touch, the more they're gonna trust you. And so I think that I think trust is something like it's not something you could just come into a company and people are automatically going to trust you. And I think that whether it's this role or any other role within the organization, it's a lot of, you really have to prove yourself and be like a trusted voice. And so, but I think that once you do hit that, it's great, So it's fantastic whether it's the CEO or another director in the organization who listens to you, and because you feel like you feel like your voice matters, you feel like you have a greater impact, and you feel like you kind of help steer the ship, so to speak.
You think, is there ever, I mean, I'm sure there's the propensity for there to be some conflict between the personality of the CEO and potentially the brand's personality. Do you have to balance that between sort of your marketing or communications or VP of communications versus your CEOs? Is that something this role deals with heavily?
Yeah, and so I think that a lot of organizations, it's a little bit different, and so they may be kind of siloed or whatnot. And so, some organizations call it executive communication, some call it corporate comms, and like I said, they're kind of separate, or they may be kind of separated from the marketing or the PR wings of that company. And so, luckily with us, our organization, we're very integrated. They're all our firm-wide marketing, our executive communications, and our PR are all part of we call it the co-CEO hub. And essentially, that is a larger department. So we're constantly meeting. We're always in contact with one another, and so that way we help ensure that the voice and the messaging for the CEOs align with what our larger goals are.
Great. So you recently taught your first online course at WVU. What do you like most about teaching IMC 648 Executive Common Leadership?
Yeah, what I love most about it is well, one, just the topic in general. It's something I'm very passionate about, and I love doing it, and I love passing along the knowledge and experience that I've gained in the field. Um, but what I like most are the activities that are in the course. When I mean by activities, I mean the discussion forums we have, the exercises we do in the forms of short papers or crafting a strategy. And so the way that the course is structured is they're based off of real life scenarios. So, for example, we will ask the students to create an action plan for a CEO's authored book. And so, and part of that plan includes not just what you're going to do to promote it, but also how you're going to measure it and how you're going to prove the ROI value of it. Undertaking a book, authoring a book, not just the production of it, but the promotion. It's a very expensive endeavor. And so, obviously, communications professionals, they have to be in contact with the CFO and prove their value. And so this kind of shows students how that dynamic works. I would say, like overall big picture, in addition to those intellectual or hypothetical exercises that we do that reflect how things really are in executive communications. I really like how the course captures the essence of what exec comms is, and its power in society. And what I mean by that is, as a society, we're kind of fascinated by CEOs and heads of organizations. And so, and I think that, for example, years ago, we saw, we have like, Henry Fords and Rockefellers, and they were heads of their companies. They weren't called CEOs. The term CEO didn't start until well into the 20th century. But we saw this later in the 20th century. The CEO of Chrysler, Lee Iacocca, and later on with Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and those other CEOs. We're fascinated with CEOs, and so what I love about this course, it really shows how that the value of a brand and image of a CEO, how that is connected to the overall performance of a company, how it's valued in the marketplace, and our role as communicators to help help improve that image. And so, like I said, it was my first term teaching that this course. But I loved it. What I love about the structure of the course is it's very engaging. The students at West Virginia University are highly engaged, very intelligent, and those conversations we had in the discussion board were outstanding. And I think that you see the number of students who participated and what they contributed to it. I think that it provided valuable takeaway that they can take with them to the next job or advancement in the career.
Great. So you mentioned a couple of things, but can you tell us about a couple of the specific assignments that students complete in IMC 648 Executive Communication and Leadership? Really looking at what kind of assignments can students expect? Is it mostly just papers? Is it PowerPoint presentations? What are they doing in the course?
Yeah. So for example, one of them is one of the sample assignments is they have to create a social media strategy for their CEO, and the exercise calls on them putting on their chief communication officer's hat on, and really working through a holistic, well integrated social media campaign for their CEO that's connected to their firm-wide marketing team, to their their PR goals. And so that's really a fun exercise because the students get to pick the CEO of their liking, and so or their choice. And so and we see that all over. I've seen people choose the CEO of Lululemon. I've seen students choose the CEO of Nike. And so it's a really fun exercise for them to get to do because they get to dive in deep to the background of that CEO and kind of find out who they are. There's another exercise where they get to lay out the outline of what a book would be for their CEO. And for example, we see every year a CEO. They tend to they'll be publishing a book that they've authored. And if you work in exec comms, a lot of times, eventually you'll probably get to the point where you are part of the process of a CEO authoring a book. Whether that part of that book is ghostwritten or you have a heavy hand in the writing of that book. It is a big, it's inevitable. You definitely get to it. And so with that exercise, students have fun with that. They craft the outline. Like I said, they get to find out what each individual chapter would look like in that book. And then how they would message that book, overall in a larger promotion plan. The final assignment of the course is developing that ROI report for the book. It complements the earlier assignment for the book, but like I said, it really connects the dots and shows students not it's not going to turn them into accountants or anything like that, and that's not the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is really just to have students exercise those muscles in taking what they do day in and day out and find the value in that and really put that in terms that the CFO and the CEO understand. So
great. So when students are preparing for upcoming courses, they often ask about the workload intensity of a course. And this is so they can prepare themselves and be able to balance all of life's other responsibilities with their graduate experience. So the question that I'm going to ask is sort of one that you can interpret however you want. But on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the least intense and 5 being the most intense, how would you rate IMC 648 Exec Common Leadership, and why did you give it that intensity rating?
I would say the intensity rating. I mean, I come in a little bit fresh to the course. It's my first course teaching at West Virginia. However, I have taught other courses, other graduate courses, other universities as well. I would say intensity wise, on a scale of 1 to 5, I would probably give it a 3. And the reason I say that is because there's not a long 20 to 25 page paper for this course as you see in most graduate programs. I think every graduate course, or a lot of graduate courses I took in the past, that was the case. And I'd say this course is 8 weeks long. It works very well for the working professional. If they're doing the master's on the side, works very well. And so every week there's a lecture. There's some required readings for that. But what I love most about the assignments are they're not exactly like a heavy lift, or they're not something that's going to ruin your weekend. Like having to participate in this course as you may have experience with say other courses, other universities. And so I think that the assignments really draw on those readings and the lecture from the course, so you don't feel like you're kind of like you don't feel like you're doing extra work or you're having to take on extra reading. It's all connected, and so it's very efficient. And the feedback I've received so far from my students in my course, they love it. And I really encourage anyone to take this course on. If it's offered in the term that they're taking courses.
Great. So what are the most important things you think an IMC student needs to do in order to be successful in this course?
Yeah. So in order to be successful, luckily, I don't think there's any prerequisites, so to speak. Meaning for this course. What I mean by that is, I sometimes you have students come in and they come fresh from undergraduate, and so they may not have that work experience. And so you don't have to have I don't have to have prior work experience, or say worked in corporate comms, or been like that one of the head communications professionals in your organization in order to take this course. This course really does a great job of synthesizing, theory and best practices out in the field. But I think that in order to succeed in this course, what it takes, um, in all honesty, it's um, I would say like this developing a good weekly schedule for the 8 weeks of the course. And what I mean by that is, of course, to start the beginning of the week, tackle that lecture at the very beginning. Luckily, the course is very structured to where, in the middle part of the week there's that discussion forum, which is essentially our live conversation that we're having about the readings and related topics with it. But in addition to that, I would say, like most students I've talked to, who've done the course, usually the readings and the course discussions really kind of spur their other interests, and so they'll naturally just kind of go out there and start looking at other third party materials on a certain topic and exec comms. And it doesn't feel like extra work, because it's something that really interests them. And so I think that's probably what most students probably, or the best way to succeed in this course is to really just kind of like go all in, but make sure you stay on schedule with the course. And in the end, like the course, it all works out in the end. It's like I mentioned earlier, it's not a heavy lift at all, for the course. And I think just to take away value from the readings and the required books for the course, like, yeah, I mean, like, for example, one of the books in the course I still use every day, or in my current job. It's a great book on executive branding, and I use that a lot of times as reference points when I'm crafting different strategies and for the CEOs of my company.
Great. So we often hear from students, obviously we're at the graduate level, we're a practitioners focused program. And so we have students that are working, while they're completing their master's degrees. And that's sort of one of the defining characteristics of a lot of our students. And the question I have is, a lot of times we'll hear from students that they learned something in a course that they were able to apply immediately at work. I know you've just taught the course one time so far, but in that, did you have any of those experiences? Any students tell you that they were able to apply immediately the things that you all were dealing with in the class?
Yeah, so we definitely do, and so and one of the things I've noticed is a couple of students who are currently working in the field. They mention, and they may work at a larger company. Uh, in the exercises where they got to select their own CEO, that the CEO of their liking, they actually chose their own CEO of their current company, and so they were actually able to kind of like do tackle two birds or kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. And so where they kind of used a course as a way to kind of develop a plan or kind of think through what they would do for their own CEO and just and take that back to their own company. And so I think that was probably the most common feedback that I heard in that regard.
Awesome. So what is your personal teaching style? How do you meaningfully engage with students in your courses?
Um, I the way I meet is I'm in constant contact with them, and what I mean by that is, I'm not pestering them, sending like emails every single day, but I'm in constant contact. I'm constantly in the discussion forum. My presence is constantly there. I'm always available to answer any questions for them. I think that when I used to years ago when I used to teach in person, it's funny, you had like 1 hour a week that was your dedicated office hours, and so and in when you teach online, really any hour can be your office hour. And so I always make myself available. I'm not just meeting and talking to students online, but I'm meeting them after hours, so to speak. We're doing like Zoom calls, providing clarification, walking them through specific assignments, helping them think about something that they may previously not have thought about in regards to a lecture or a reading or their assignment. And so, but I think that why I'm like that is because I think like years ago, having worked in customer service, years ago in my life, I think have to bring some of those principles over to when you teach. It's all about kind of helping meet those students where they're at. And that's the approach I've always taken.
That's great. So this may be a related question, but what do you think defines you as an instructor?
Ooh, what defines me as an instructor? I mean, what defines me as an instructor? I would like to think that I do a great job of kind of synthesizing um, academic research and theory with real life experiences. And I think that I've seen that not just at our university, but I think online that we've seen that online trend in the past decade where um, it's really kind of like that bridging that gap, or kind of like like I said, like kind of infusing both of them. And so that's the approach I kind of take whenever if I reference something that happened, say in the business press, like something that's happened out there. I always try to like then connect it to some academic theory, to provide context for that, or vice versa. I do the same thing with that, um, and then as I mentioned, like just always being available. I'm constantly available, and so I try to reply within a few hours of emails. I always try to meet students online, and so I think it's that combination of infusing, bridging, um, uh, what's happening in the business marketplace with academia, and then also just being accessible is like what defines me.
Great. And so what is your favorite aspect of teaching in WVU's online marketing communications graduate programs?
I'm sorry. What was that question again? I'm sorry.
What was no problem. I know I've asked you a lot of questions. What has been your favorite aspect of teaching in WVU's online marketing communications graduate programs?
uh, well, I mean, in all honesty, it's the student body at WVU, and so it was my first term coming in teaching here, and so you never know how the student body is going to be, and like every university is different, and so really, I was, pleasantly, I was, not surprised, but like, I was really pleased with it, with what I got in the course. And so I think that, West Virginia does a great job with recruiting and, the students. And what I love was just the passion of the students. Like, I've taught at some universities, they say you have a discussion board post, and students won't make a post until like the day it's due, and so you with this course and the student body at WVU, like as soon as that discussion board post became available, there were students posting, early, jumping right into the discussion board. And so that sort of passion is really kind of what energizes me. And so as an instructor, and so and I think it's very unique to this program because, like as I mentioned, Nick, you don't just have the experience of teaching at other universities. You don't get that at every university.
Great. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you expected me to? Or anything else you want to say about the course?
I would just say, I mean, I do want to add that, like, why someone would want to take this course, like um, I think that we're all communicators and we have different aspirations for our career. I do think that why this course is important because there will likely be some point in your career where either you're working directly with the executives or you're in some adjacent position where you're heavily involved with the CEOs and the C-suite on their messaging. And so this course really provides that insight, that window to that. And so, and this course isn't offered at every university and not every program. And that's why I'm glad it's offered here. But I think that, as I mentioned, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think that the role of the CEO and having that face to a company is going to be, it has been an important thing, not just in past decades and not currently, but even going forward. If you look at on social media, and what posts tend to go viral the most, what tends to get the most engagement, it's usually not a branded post. It's not like, necessarily like, the branded Twitter handle of a company. It's usually an individual within a company, whether it's the CEO or another representative in the company. People gravitate towards individuals, and this course is about, how you manage the messaging and the communications for the individual. And so it's extremely valuable, and it's completely relevant to not only today's environment, but the emerging marketplace.
That's great. As you're talking and I'm thinking about, like, just the things that I pay attention to. I think of Mark Cuban as sort of the epitome of a CEO that's personality and brand is so integrated into his company and everything he does. So just interesting. I imagine. I'm sure that's intentional. Do you think that it was always intentional, or do you think that this is something that is becoming more intentional because of those really prominent figures?
Yeah, I do think it's intentional. And so there was a time years ago, like, in the business world where, CEOs didn't express their opinion publicly. You could easily be behind the scenes, and, run a healthy company, have a great career as a CEO. And I think that, you know, heads of companies, CEOs like Mark Cuban, um, they've realized they've seen over the years, like, no, you have to put yourself out there. People connect with individuals. They don't, most definitely there's definitely brand loyalty out there. There's no doubt about it whatsoever. But those brands are so much better, and more relatable if they have a face to it. And so, and you can really think about like some of like the most iconic companies in our lives. Like more than likely you've come across or seen, or you can identify who their CEO or their founder is. And so, so yeah, to answer your question, it's most definitely intentional.